So the original plan for this video was to do kind of a Bigfoot roundup video. I wanted to take several alleged recordings of Bigfoot, put them in one video, break them down, analyze the footage, and share my thoughts on it. Obviously, I would have to include the Patterson-Gimlin footage because that is, till this day, the most famous and most discussed Bigfoot sighting out there. And as I was looking into this case, I was diving deeper and deeper into it, and I realized there's no way that I can fit other Bigfoot footage into this one video because there's so much that goes into it and that I want to talk about that is relevant to it, that I'm now doing a full standalone deep dive video on the Patterson-Gimlin footage. And trust me, there's a lot there. So if you're thinking, you're watching this and you're like, well, this is clearly a guy in a suit. Yes, I will make points that nudge towards that direction, but trust me, there are so many aspects to that you have probably never heard of. There's so much background to this film, how it came to be and how it gained the traction and relevance that it still has today, that you might want to keep watching the video because I'm going to try to offer answers at least to all the key questions of this case. Like, was it a suit? Who made the suit? And if it is a suit, who was in the suit? And why would Patterson himself orchestrate a hoax? So there are so many questions that I obviously can't fully conclusively answer, right? Because this footage has never 100% proven to be real or fake. So all I can really do is highlight these questions, offer background information and research, and then you will have to make up your own mind. But feel free to use timestamps on the video, okay? I'm going to timestamp all the chapters. So if you just want to see the part where I'm analyzing the footage, feel free to click to that timestamp and check that out for yourself. And again, all the other questions will have timestamps in this YouTube video. Also, before we get into the deep dive, please share your thoughts on the footage down in the comment section below, because I already teased it that I'm going to make this video in the YouTube community section, and I've got like 50% of people saying, yeah, it's definitely real, I'm 100% convinced this is real footage, and so on. And the other 50% saying it's just a guy in a suit, okay? So there's clearly controversy out there, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the footage and its authenticity down in the comment section below. But let's get into the analysis first. Now, the footage that we're seeing here is not the original film, okay? It is a 60 FPS stabilized version of the film, but it is basically the original footage. It's just been cleaned up, uprest slightly. It was originally shot in 1967 in Northern California in Bluff Creek by a man called Roger Patterson, and Bob Gimlin was also there on site. And we're going to get to that at a later point in the video, how that came to be that these two men were there. Now, what many of you may not know is that the footage that we're looking at here is actually part of a much longer film. Okay, you can find it on Wikipedia. It's all there, and we're gonna talk about it later on how this film came to be. But there is a longer film that shows Gimlin. It was recorded by Patterson walking around. They're riding around through these Northern Californian woods close to Bluff Creek on their horses, and then towards the end of the film, that's where the camera gets shaky and he seems to be running towards this creature and filming the creature kind of ad hoc, right, in the heat of the moment. And that's how this original footage came to be. But it is part of a much longer film that was shot at 16 frames per second originally. But again, as I mentioned already, we have upscaled versions, right? We have versions now that just look better, that have been stabilized, that have been uprest to slightly higher resolutions. And this, for example, runs with 60 frames per second. Now, don't mistake this. This is not an AI-enhanced version. Nowadays, especially when it comes to UFO footage and paranormal footage, often you get these kind of up-res versions where some AI adds a lot of detail to existing footage. That is not the case here. I mean, sure, frames have been added. If you take a film that was shot with 16 frames per second and you scale it up to 60 frames, sure, frames have been interjected in between the footage to make it more smooth, but it's not AI-enhanced in the sense that loads of information has been added here. It was really just created in an effort to clean it up, in an effort to make it smoother, to make it more readable, to give us additional information so we can really analyze the footage and see what's really there. But let's analyze the footage a little bit and go into some of the commonly raised points by supporters and believers in the authenticity of this footage. One argument you hear very, very often is people saying, well, it has to be real because there are muscles visible, right? You look at this footage, you can clearly see muscles. And there's especially like one step that he's taken right here. Have you just seen that? Like when he puts his right foot down here in this little gap between the rocks, you seem to be able to see the calf muscle tightening, right? There seems to be like a strong creature or even a strong human, a runner, puts his foot on the ground, you can see almost like, you know, a tightening movement, a tightening motion going through the calf muscle. And that's what people claim, what believers claim can be seen here. Now, to that, I would say, if this is a suit, right, and this is the counter argument, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. If this is a suit and it's made of fur, if you would step on the ground with a little bit of like a solid movement, the fur on the suit would kind of wave, right? Because you step on the ground. If the fur is like a bit stiff and stuff, just the stepping motion will almost have the same effect of a tightening calf muscle on that fur, and you will get like this ripple effect of the fur, and that would emulate this calf muscle. And if you ask me, this particular step here that a lot of people are pointing out really just looks like fur to me that is moving, that has a wavy motion because this creature or this man in the suit, whatever it is stepping on the ground. So I think overall the idea to say, well, you can clearly see muscles doesn't really hold up. There are indicators also on his back, right? Like how the arm moves in relation to the back and stuff. There are indicators that could be read as muscle movement, but it's not clear. It could absolutely also have been achieved with the suit. Okay, so to say, well, there's muscle movement, that's evidence that it's real, I would strongly disagree with that statement and say that that's not what it is. Again, it could be muscles, but it also could be a suit that was just incredibly well made, and obviously a lot of information in the footage is lost in the detail due to the camera that it was filmed with and so on. There's another point that I would like to point out, and that is a crease that sits on the top of his right leg here, right? Just between the hip and the leg. I want you to keep a close look at that, especially in this part here. Do you see this? As he moves, there is a little crease that sits right above it. And to me, that very much, again, you know, that could be an artifact from the video, because again, it's been slightly upscaled, so artifacts can happen. But that to me looks like cloth folding, right? You know what I mean? It's like it folds. Why am I doing this movement on my breast? That's slightly weird. But it looks much more like creasing fabric or leather or something that has hair on it rather than skin. You know, the way it just creases on the top of his leg there. Also, a lot of people are pointing out that it could actually be a suit separation point. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense, so that he basically wears like the legs as long boots, right? Boots that go all the way up to his hip. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense, but it is a point that people are raising. But I think undoubtedly you can see this crease there. It casts a very, very clear shadow. I'm going to try to get like a pause there. Do you see this? This straight line here. That's what I'm talking about. It's a crease, especially in the motion when he's moving. You can see it. It creases up and down as the leg moves. Doesn't look too real to me personally. Another point that people are raising are the toes. And specifically in the beginning of the video, you can see it here. The creature seems to be lifting his toe. Do you see this? As he steps forward, the toes are up. You'll see it here in a second. It keeps slowing down. You see this? The toes seem to go up and then they go down, right? As he puts the foot down. So a lot of people are saying, well, you know, how would you achieve something like that with a suit, with artificial toes that, you know, basically are just enlarged shoes and there's a foot inside? You couldn't control the toes in that manner. Now, to that, I would say, to me, it looks much more like, for example, if you would wear monster feet, right? Just for lack of a better word, like the feet of a monster, and you would wear them over your shoes. So you're not actually in a boot. It's not a separate boot. You're still wearing your boots. But these Bigfoot feet cover the top of your shoe, right? So now as you're stepping, they're not fully attached to your shoe. They might be flapping up and down slightly, right? As you're firmly stepping on the ground, lifting your foot, moving forward, they would be flapping up and down. And if you ask me, a little bit like you see it here, not exactly, this is just a picture I could find as I was looking for it now, but you get the idea. You're wearing the Bigfoot feet above your shoes, and as you're stepping down, they flap up and down. And to be honest, we don't know if the footage we're looking at here is possibly his toes, but it could absolutely also just be these Bigfoot feet, right? The part of the costume that sit over his shoes, flapping kind of up as he's stepping forward. And then obviously the reason why it looks a lot like toes and why we get this motion here that very much looks like the toes go up before they go to the ground could also be the artifacts of the footage. I mean, let's be honest, it's horrible quality footage. Artifacts like that can happen, and to say, yeah, well, it's definitely real because he's lifting his toes in footage at that quality, it's just an unreasonable argument to make. Again, it could be toes, but it could absolutely also be the feet of the costume sitting above the guy's shoes. And if you look even closer, if you want to make that argument, you could make even the argument on the counterweight. You can see like what's going on here, right? Like what's up with that. It actually very much looks like he might be wearing, if you want to go that deep into the artifacts of the video, like he's wearing light shoes. Like there seems to be like a light layer here, right? Let's look at that a few more times with something over it. Do you see what I mean? But again, the argument I just made goes both ways. You could absolutely say the light shoe artifact we see here is just an artifact that was created through the compression and the age of the video. And so you can make the same argument for the toes going up and down. So I don't think the whole toe rising argument, again, is a valid argument that holds some weight, especially considering the quality of the footage. Now, it has to be said that back in the 1960s, when this footage was created and recorded, costume design was very basic, okay? But also has to be said that, as I said before, the quality of this footage hides a lot of detail. Over the years, a lot of experts, costume designers and so on, special effects artists like, for example, Stan Winston, have chimed in on whether this would have been possible. Because, for you and me, we would say, well, there are loads of movies in the 1960s that have garbage costumes. So how, and this is Hollywood, how could it be humanly possible for someone like Roger Patterson to create such a great looking and authentic Bigfoot costume? But to be honest, the experts disagree on the statement that it would not have been possible. Again, even people like Stan Winston, who is very famous in the special effects and especially prop making, costume making scene. He won even Academy Awards, I think, for his costumes. He said it is absolutely possible. And again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that later. So again, the argument goes both ways. Does it look like a very good suit for that time age? Yes. Does that prove that the footage is authentic? No. Could it be a suit? Absolutely. Okay, it could absolutely have been a suit, and to say, well, it's impossible to make a suit like that during that time, that argument falls flat as well. It doesn't really stand. Now, what's interesting is, kind of similar to what I mentioned in the beginning, that this all is part of a larger piece of film. There's also a rarely seen second reel of footage that Patterson shot when he was on site in 1967 that shows footprints, that shows the trackway of this alleged Bigfoot Sasquatch in the mud. It has been slowed down by, I think, 25%, so you can soak up the information slightly more. So here you go, okay? So you can see big footprints, right? Yeah, that's what it is. Bigfoot certainly has a Bigfoot. So he's following these footprints, walking down. I assume this one has been filled with some kind of resin or whatever to capture the footprint. It's just interesting that this footage exists and is rarely shown or put into reference with the original famous Patterson-Gimlin film, but it does exist and it allegedly shows Bigfoot's footprints in Bluff Creek on that day. It's just an additional piece of information that I would wanted to put in this video. But let's get into some of the general questions around this footage, some inconsistencies and some facts that you guys may be not aware of. For example, did you know that Roger Patterson, prior to recording this famous film, he had a strong interest in Bigfoot? Apparently, he read an article about the creature that was written by Evan T. Sanderson in True magazine in December 1959, and he was hooked. He was hooked on the idea of Bigfoot, of Sasquatch living in the woods. He was also mentioned in a book about Bigfoot that was written by Marianne Place, in which he wrote about Patterson. Okay, this is someone who met him, who spoke to Patterson, and who then later wrote a book about the experience and mentioned the following about Patterson. I'm quoting here, okay? This is a quote from this book. In 1962, he, Patterson, visited Bluff Creek and talked with a whole loads of Bigfoot believers. In 1964, he returned and met a timber cruiser named Pat Graves, who drove him to Laird Meadows. There, Patterson saw fresh tracks. For him, an almost unbearably exciting, spine-chilling experience. What a tremendous feat it would be, what a scientific breakthrough if he could obtain unshakable evidence that these tracks were not the work of a prankster, but the actual mark of a hitherto unknown creature. If he succeeded, he would be famous and rich. Alas, fame and fortune were not gained that year, nor the next. Patterson invested thousands of hours and dollars combing Bigfoot and Sasquatch territory. He found constant ridicule and a shortage of funds. He founded the Northwest Research Foundation. Through it, he solicited funds. The response was encouraging and enabled him to lead several expeditions. In 1966, he published a paperback book at his own expense. He added the income from its sales and his lectures to the search fund. As each wilderness jaunt failed to see or capture the monster, one by one the thrill seekers dropped out, but Patterson never gave up. Now, this particular book that is mentioned here, that Patterson wrote himself, that was self-published, was released in 1966. It mostly contained newspaper clippings, sketches, interviews, and letters. It was called Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? And looking at pages of that book, we realized that Patterson was actually a talented artist. Okay, I found some takeouts from the book here in this tweet. It says in 1966, Patterson drew for his book on Bigfoot a scene where a hunter with a gun is watching a female Bigfoot, notice the breast here, cross a clearing. Patterson's drawing was a copy of an illustration by Mort Künstler, done for an article by Ivan Sanderson. It depicts the William Rowe encounter. And he shares this picture again. This is a painting that Patterson made himself. So he was a bit of an artist. He had a good eye for images, for composition, for light, shadow. You know what I mean? Again, it's not evidence for anything. It's just important to mention that. Also, it says here, very important point. Remember the mention earlier in this thread about the Patterson-Gimlin film being made on October 20th. This was a Friday. And yet Patterson and his friends were watching the processed film on Sunday 22nd. Okay, so shot allegedly on the 20th, they're watching it on the 22nd. Long went to some trouble to show by investigating which laboratories, shop and so on were capable of processing that film back in 1967 that this wasn't possible and that the October 20th date couldn't be accurate because it was a weekend, okay? And I read about this in another article as well. Apparently only very, very few companies in that area were able to develop that film. You needed like a $60,000 machine to develop that kind of film. And it was a weekend. He shot it on a Friday, and on Sunday, they were watching it already. So it just raises the question, like, when and where was this film developed? And nobody, as far as I did my research, nobody could give a clear answer to that question. How it came to be that 2 days later they watched the film, where exactly it was developed. This is a good argument and means the Patterson-Gimlin film must have been filmed on an earlier date. This doesn't prove anything. It doesn't, true. But if the date was fabricated and Patterson and Gimlin were and have been consistent in publishing it as the right date, it makes you wonder what else is, right? So that is a very, very important point. The timeline on the development of the film just doesn't line up with when they were watching it and with the laboratories in the area that were capable of developing it. It's a big question mark that I personally, and I tried to find an answer to that, I personally couldn't find a clear and convincing answer to how that came to be. Darren Naish at Tetsu, by the way, this is the guy who wrote all these tweets. I'm sure you can see it on screen. But he also said in the context of this tweet chain, of this thread, saying, I contend also that the circumstantial evidence pointing to a hoax is good. For starters, we know that Roger Patterson was an excellent craftsman and artist. Here's a drawing which Patterson did from Long's book. Okay, so, and again, here's another drawing that Patterson did himself. He says down here as well, Roger Patterson was a self-trained artist, fascinated by rodeo and other Western subjects. He was a state of detail, so on. So, great drawing, great sketch. Again, needs a bit of artistic skill, an eye for imagery, composition, and so on. Again, it doesn't prove anything, but it is an important point that we have to mention. Also, here's another important point that puts some questions on all this, especially when it comes to him fabricating parts of the story. And that is that at some point, Roger Patterson, brought a fake Bob Gimlin to Bigfoot conventions. Then he later apologized for that on his deathbed. But in this article, and I'm going to link all these articles and references down in the description, you can check them out yourself. It says, all of a sudden, in an apparently scripted scenario after Patterson showed the Bigfoot film, up on stage strolled out a man dressed like a Western ranch hand. Now, one of Gimlin's friends was in the audience that day, and he saw him, and obviously he's like, that's not Bob Gimlin. But to the friend and most of the audience surprise, the cowboy introduced himself saying, "Hi everyone, I'm Bob Gimlin. And I saw the Bigfoot too. Like Roger said, I was there." Bob Gimlin's friend said that he felt like standing up and yelling something like, "Hey, damn it, I know Bob Gimlin, and that's not Bob Gimlin." Instead of a confrontation, the friend decided to call up Bob about what he had witnessed with his own eyes with this staged act. Bob, a quiet man, never pressed Roger on it, but the two grew apart and Bob waited. It wasn't long before Roger Patterson's health started to decline and dying. Roger called Bob to his bedside, weak, obviously near death, and apparently wanting to die with a clean slate. Gimlin told me that Roger said to him, "Bob, we did you wrong. I shouldn't have had that fella act like he was you. I did wrong." So again, it's not evidence that he faked it, but it's another aspect of the story that just raises serious questions. If they were not fully truthful, or if at least Roger Patterson wasn't fully truthful about developing that film, or, between the 20th and the 22nd when they were watching it, so there's a bit of a truth gap there. Now he is willing to bring like a fake Bob Gimlin to a Bigfoot convention and introduce him as the real Bob Gimlin. Like, there's definitely already a little bit of a tendency here of someone who's willing to stretch the truth. Do you know what I mean? Again, it doesn't prove the whole thing is fake or a hoax, but it does certainly point into that direction. Now, how did it come to be that there is this longer film that we looked at in the beginning, at least part of it? That is because in May-June 1967, Patterson began filming a docudrama or some kind of pseudo-documentary about cowboys being led by an old miner and a wise Indian tracker on a hunt for Bigfoot. And that Indian in that film, you saw it in the beginning, right? There was footage of like people riding on horses and stuff. That is part of that film. And that Indian that was in that film was portrayed by Bob Gimlin. He was basically the actor, and that's why he was there with him on that day in Bluff Creek. Now, the film was about finding Bigfoot, okay, which is also a funny coincidence, right? They go out, they want to shoot this mockumentary, I guess you could say, pseudo-documentary, and the idea is we're going to find Bigfoot, and then they do find Bigfoot, but for real. And if that was their ambition, to shoot a mockumentary about finding Bigfoot, surely you would want to have a climactic scene in there where they actually find Bigfoot, and for that, you would need some kind of costume. Now, in the early afternoon of Friday, October 20th, 1967, Patterson and Gimlin were riding generally northeast upstream on horseback along the east bank of Bluff Creek when they both allegedly spotted the creature. Patterson estimated the height at the time at 6 feet and 6 inches, so almost 2 meters. Gimlin's estimate was slightly lower at just 6 feet, 1 meter 80. And I found this great piece of footage. Credit goes to Green Wave 2010 FB on YouTube. And what he did is he actually went to the side and recorded the same space with a man walking through it. He then turned it into kind of a panorama shot. Obviously, it's just one man, but he repeated it kind of infinitely and made him walk as close to the original path that Bigfoot allegedly walked on that day to estimate the height of that creature. Now, the guy in this film is 6 foot and 5 inches, so a fairly big guy. But what this Green Wave 2010 FB guy did is he now overlaid the existing Patterson-Gimlin film over these frames, right? And you can actually see as Bigfoot is traversing past these trees, they're lining up perfectly with the imagery that this guy shot. Now, he tried to use the same camera to get the exact same angle. And what's interesting is you can now see how Bigfoot compares to this guy who is 6 foot and 5 inches in size. And you can see he's roughly the same size, maybe slightly smaller. I mean, if he keeps walking here, he seems slightly bigger, but it's roughly the same size, which proves that this creature, whatever it is basically human height. Okay, he might be a tall guy, and keep in mind, if he's wearing a suit, that will probably add like a few inches to your size as well. But by no means is he huge, right? By no means is he like 2.5 meters big, as we often get, especially in other Bigfoot recordings, like these reports where people say, well, it's just this ginormous creature. So he's most definitely about human size, and I'm very glad that Green Wave 2010 FB, I think also an MK Davis, to be honest, here it says MK Davis produces an amazing video of the Patterson-Gimlin film. So maybe MK Davis is responsible for creating this footage. I found it on his YouTube channel. You know, I try to give credit where credit is due, but it certainly confirms that the creature is not humongously big, which was never claimed by Patterson or by Gimlin, but I think it's an interesting point that he's definitely human size. Now, when witnessing the creature that day in Bluff Creek, both of them claimed, Patterson and Gimlin said, that it was definitely a female due to the prominent breasts that the creature had. They followed the creature allegedly and ran towards it, shooting the famous footage. That's why it's so shaky in the beginning. We looked at it early on in this video. It's very shaky. And then once he's on the footage, it's actually fairly steady footage. It shakes around a little bit, but there's enough information there. Afterwards, Gimlin then followed the creature further until it disappeared around a bend in the woods. Both of them had rifles with them, But ironically, they both agreed, allegedly, that if they would encounter a Bigfoot creature or anything in the woods like that, they wouldn't even aim the rifles at the creature. And so at no point, whenever they encountered it, was a rifle aimed or targeted at this creature that looked like Bigfoot. When it comes to the witness reports of Patterson and Gimlin as a whole, most of them are similar. Okay, so most of the things that they say line up, but there are some inconsistencies that have to be mentioned as well. So for example, both of them described differently how their horses reacted to spotting Bigfoot or being close to Bigfoot. I think Patterson said that his horse strongly reacted, it moved around, he could barely tame it, while Gimlin never mentioned that at all and really didn't point out any reaction of the horse, if I remember correctly reading about it. Also, Patterson increased his estimate of the size of the creature when retelling his story at later occasions. So we saw it earlier, he gave that report of the size of the creature being like just at around 2 meters at the time, and then he increased it as he spoke about it in later lectures at Bigfoot conventions and so on. And in 1999, in a phone interview with TV producer Chris Packham for BBC's X Creatures, Gimlin said, okay, this is a quote from Bob Gimlin from 1999, "I was totally convinced no one could fool me. And of course, I'm an older man now, and I think there could have been the possibility of a hoax, but it would have been a really, really well-planned hoax by Roger Patterson." So even Bob Gimlin in 1999 does not exclude the option that it could have been a hoax, which is kind of dodgy to me as well, right? It could have been all orchestrated by Patterson, setting it all up, getting that guy with the suit in place, making sure that he and Gimlin are there, giving the signal, the guy was... So Gimlin wasn't even involved. So Gimlin, that's the best way to fake something, right? To get authentic eyewitnesses. Gimlin would be witnessing the creature and thinking it would be real as well, not even being involved in the hoax. That is a possibility. Personally, I think that is unlikely, but that is something that Bob Gimlin said in this BBC interview in 1999. Now, there's a bunch of people who claim to have been involved in the creation of this film, beyond Patterson and Gimlin, obviously. For example, there's a man called Clyde Reinke. Now, Clyde Reinke was a former office manager for the American National Enterprises, which is a now defunct movie company that specialized in wildlife films. And he claimed to have first-hand knowledge of the film being a hoax. Now, Reinke claimed that Roger Patterson was on the company's payroll as a wildlife photographer. According to Reinke, Patterson and A&E, so the American National Enterprises, cooked up the scheme to fake this Bigfoot film. A&E's alleged plan was to use the film as a loss leader that would attract huge audiences into the theater to see the footage, and it would be sandwiched between their other movies. Like a little bit of a filler in between the movies, so people would go see the other films, but a lot of them may just come to see that famous Bigfoot footage in the theaters. The Bigfoot film increased attendance tremendously, Reinke claimed on Fox News' 1-hour special interview that was part of the World's Greatest Hoaxes, Secrets Finally Revealed. That's the name of the program, was running at the time on Fox's network. And in that he said, "That's why we planned it. We wanted it to have as a little filler between existing films, and it worked really well. It increased attendance tremendously." That's a quote. That's what he said exactly. Author Greg Long, we spoke about his book briefly earlier already, also uncovered circumstantial evidence of varying strengths, for example, of footprint hoaxing, and possibly even of sighting and photo hoaxing by Patterson. That is covered in his book. And going further, he theorized that this evidence was faked and hoaxed to raise funds for further expeditions. And to be honest with you, again, all this is not 100% evidence that it's all fake or whatever, but that makes a lot of sense to me, because reading through it and reading all this background about Patterson really being obsessed with Bigfoot at the time and the existence of Bigfoot and Sasquatch in the woods, and knowing that he was struggling to fund his expeditions and get money, and that he was basically, from what I read about it, always short on funds. He never had enough money. It makes a lot of sense, right? If you fake this one Bigfoot footage that's really convincing, put it out there, make some money with that. Now your research can continue. I don't doubt that he genuinely believed that this creature is real, but maybe he faked the footage for the greater good, to get the money, to fund his own expeditions, to go out there again, and then ultimately actually capture the real Bigfoot. Possible that that was his intention. That's what author Greg Long theorized in his book. There's also Philip Morris, okay? Philip Morris in 2002, he's the owner of Morris Costumes, he said that he sold an ape suit to Patterson via mail order in 1967, so the year that the film was shot. He was thinking that it was going to be used in what Patterson described as a prank. Okay, so he spoke to Patterson and he said, yeah, we're going to do this prank. I need an ape suit. Morris stated and said that Patterson telephoned him, asking him how they could make the shoulders more massive and how he could make the arms appear longer. Morris then said that he suggested to Patterson that whoever would be wearing the suit could wear football shoulder pads inside of it and maybe hold sticks in his hands within the suit to make the arms appear slightly longer. So at least that's what Philip Morris claimed in 2002. And there's a little bit more evidence regarding the suit that I will present to you guys a little bit later. There is no true corroborating evidence. For example, pictures of the suit or any evidence that he actually manufactured the suit. But I feel it is worth mentioning that in here, that is a statement that Philip Morris claimed to be true. In a Bigfoot documentary, a man called Bob Heronimus also claimed that he was involved in the shooting of the film, and specifically he claimed to have been the guy in the suit. And now this is very, very interesting. Check out the following footage. And again, I will link it down in the description. Okay, this is, what is this, National Geographic or something. This is footage of this man, Bob Heronimus, being interviewed, talking about his experience of being in the suit, how it came to it, how he was promised to be paid $1,000 for doing this. Apparently he was very young, he was like 22, I believe, at the time. And look at his stride. That is him walking, okay? And either he just coincidentally very much looks like this exact movement that Bigfoot is doing in the video. Because a lot of people say, well, that's no human could ever walk like this. Well, look at his stride. Look at his way of walking. It is identical. Either he practiced it intentionally to look like the stride that Bigfoot was using in that video, or he possibly was the exact guy. So again, he was very young at the time, and he welcomed the offer of getting $1,000 for appearing in this film, obviously anonymously and never talking about it. The problem was he was never paid for it. Okay, he never received the $1,000 from Roger Patterson. So that's why after many years he came out and speak out about his experience. His experience was corroborated by his mother. Okay, you know, it's a family member. I don't think family members count as witnesses in court or whatever, at least here in the UK, and in Germany they don't. But she claimed to have seen the suit in the trunk of his car the day after he returned. Okay, so he was out in the woods doing something. She didn't even know what he was doing. Obviously, he tried to keep it silent. He was paid well for it. Wasn't, but he was promised to be well paid for it. By chance, she had to put something in his car. He was sleeping or something. She opened the trunk, saw the suit. His nephew was 8 at the time, saw the suit too. He grew up, later claimed that he played with the suit, he took it out. The mother, being shocked by the suit because it looked fairly real and convincing, she was like, what the hell is that? Is this like a dead creature in the trunk of my son's car? She called over her sister-in-law, who allegedly saw the suit too. So there are several witnesses corroborating that story, and there's a whole lengthy article about that, talking about their experience in quite extensive detail. It's called Exposing Roger Patterson's 1967 Bigfoot Film Hoax. It's not that long. It's a few pages. I read through it. There's interesting stuff there, but especially when it comes to the witnesses who claim to have also seen the suit. They also talk about who made the suit, allegedly, but we'll get to that in a minute. I'll link this article down in the description as well, so you can go check it out. Now, overall, over all these years that the footage has been around, it has been analyzed by many researchers, biologists, image analysts, and most of them come to the conclusion that the gait, the speed, the limb ratios, the stride, the posture are all reproducible by a human. Okay, it's not that a biologist looks at this and says, oh my God, this could never be recreated. Like, most of them come to the conclusion and say, yeah, it is pretty much on par with how a human in a suit would move. Again, it's not evidence, but people who spend a lot of time looking at primates and so on also say that like this kind of, I think it's called like a bipedal creature wouldn't walk like that. And there are just a lot of inconsistencies in like the world of biology and how this creature walks, how it behaves, how it looked back. If you're a biologist, you watch this footage, loads of them say that it gave him a hiccup, and And it wasn't really consistent with biology and how nature really works. Also, briefly touched on it previously, but Academy Award-winning film special effects supervisor and makeup artist Stan Winston, right, of the, what is it called? The Stan Winston School, right? Legendary place for special effects, for doing exactly that, right? For making suits. They've been around for a very long time, or at least Stan Winston has been working on costumes and so forth his whole life, basically. That was his body of work in his life. And he said, after watching the Patterson-Gimlin film, and this is a quote, "It's a guy in a bad hairsuit. Sorry." He also added that if one of my colleagues had created this suit for a movie, he would be out of business. He went on to comment that the suit in the film could have been made today for a couple $100, or at least under $1,000 in a day. Okay, so that is someone who does nothing else but build suits like that for a very, very long time. He knows how suits work, how you can emulate muscles and so on. And I think when it comes to the suit and people be like, yeah, you can see the muscle flex inside the suit. People who say this, people who say, yeah, this is it can't be a suit, it's so credible, they are not biologists. And they are also not special effects artists. So when it comes to credibility, I tend to go to the guys or listen to the guys that know about this stuff. Okay, so if a special effects artist, Academy Award-winning film special effects artist says something like that, I believe him more than I believe the guy on Reddit or Facebook who says there's no way that could be a suit. Same with a biologist saying this does not align with like bipedal primate behavior and so on. The way the hair grows, everything, it doesn't align with anything that we know about biology. I tend to listen to those people more personally, it's just my opinion, than I would listen to a guy on Facebook, on Reddit, or on Twitter. And then last but not least, there's also the story around Ray Wallace. Now, Ray Wallace was a known amateur Bigfoot hoaxer. His family went public and claimed after he died that he started the Bigfoot phenomenon with fake footprints that he left in Californian sites in 1958. And Mark Chorvinsky, who was editor of Strange magazine, confirmed Wallace's claim that he tipped off Patterson exactly where to look for Bigfoot. So break that down for a second. Here's a man who's known to be a hoaxer. He doesn't know the slightest thing about Bigfoot. He had this idea. He faked the footprints. Okay, we know this by now. That's confirmed. And he tips off Patterson with this Bluff Creek information, right? He said, and this is Ray Wallace saying this, Roger Patterson came over dozens of times pumping me on this Bigfoot. Ray Wallace explained to researcher Dennis Pilchis in 1982. I felt sorry for Roger Patterson. He told me he had cancer of the lymph glands and he was desperately broke and he wanted to try to get something where he could have a little income. Well, he went down there exactly where I told him. And I told him, you go down there and hang around that bank, being Bluff Creek, stay up there and watch that spot, okay? So that's the quote from Ray Wallace, who basically sent Patterson down where he filmed Bigfoot, where then Patterson obviously believed he could find Bigfoot, but the whole thing was built on a big nothing burger because the guy Ray Wallace was a hoaxer. He didn't know where to find Bigfoot. He had no clue, but he felt sorry for Roger Patterson, so he sent him down there, probably a place that he knew, and that's how it all came to be. Now, guys, there's so much more to this story, but I feel this video is already long enough. I doubt that any of you guys are still watching. But I felt this is an interesting story. It is worth breaking down that excruciating detail. None of the things I listed today I would consider as 100% proof that the whole thing is a hoax. However, during my research, I found way more indicators of Patterson even being involved in hoaxing other things, in lying about details, about stretching the truth in some regard, about bringing out like fake Bob Gimlin and so on. There are so many red flags in this that I personally believe he faked this thing. Probably as Greg Long suspected in his book, that he tried to raise funds for further expeditions because he was obsessed with it, he was broke, and he thought, well, you know, it's a bit like gambling, right? It's like trying to farm gold. You just have to find this one big nugget of gold and that will change everything, right? If I just get this one shot of Bigfoot, that will make me rich, that will solve all my problems. That's how it sounds to me, and that's how I believe this footage came to be. A final point that I want to make here is that this footage has been shot, as we mentioned, in 1967. It was not common to carry a camera around with you in 1967. It's not like today, we all have mobile phones in our pockets, and ironically, there's not that much Bigfoot footage out there that has at least any form of credibility. So for him to carry this bulky, expensive equipment, out into the woods to film a mockumentary about someone finding Bigfoot, and then he encounters a Bigfoot and he manages to film it? Like, what are the odds of that, right? You know what I mean? Just from a logical point of view, it's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely that he's in the middle of the woods with all this equipment, making a film about Bigfoot, being Bigfoot obsessed, being sent there by a guy who had no idea what he was talking about, and then he actually captures Bigfoot with this equipment. I don't know, man. Just filtering it through like a logical filter, to me, it already falls apart. At that point, it's a very, very neat shot. Okay, it's great footage. The suit, the location, the camera work, the lighting, it is very, very well done, and it works very, very well. And that comes back to him being a bit of an artist, having an eye for things like that, probably seeing it, imagining the shot, being a fairly good director and staging that scene. It works extremely well and it is credible. But do I personally believe that it is real? I don't. I think it was a man in a suit. And looking at the stride and movement of Bob Heronimus, together with him claiming that he was the guy in the suit, I mean, sure, he could have practiced it, trained it, but to me, that solves the puzzle, okay? There are just too many puzzle pieces that point into the direction of a hoax. Again, none of them can be proven 100%, but so can't the footage, the original footage, right? My personal opinion is it was a guy in a suit. It's great footage. It's amazing. I love this piece of footage. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's authentic. So guys, that's it. A very lengthy, deep dive breakdown into the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Now, please understand that during my research, there was so much stuff that I read about it that I could have included in this video, but I had to draw the line somewhere. So if you want to add important points about this that I didn't mention, maybe arguments that speak for the authenticity that I didn't mention or just didn't know about, please leave them in the comment section below. I hope we can start a little bit of a discussion about this footage down in the comments. You can also join our Discord, okay, where we can continue the conversation. I'm hanging out there. It's a great community. We're not just talking about UFO and Bigfoot, but like many other things. Video games, politics, you can vent about your problems. It's a great community. The link to our Discord is in the description. I would be delighted to meet you there. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time. If you're still watching now, then smash the like button. I would greatly appreciate that as well. And I hope to see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. I'm out. Bye.